Can Gabriel Landeskog play a full season for the Avalanche? Have the Lightning done enough to improve their depth issues? And have the Minnesota Wild helped themselves to make a longer playoff run this year? We've got all that and a lot more on today's Locked On NHL podcast.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Gil Martin here, and welcome everybody to the Monday edition of the Locked On NHL podcast. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank everyone who makes Locked On NHL your first listen every day. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts so you never miss an episode. It is great to welcome back to the show the co-host of Locked On Lightning, Nick Morgan. And Nick, an interesting offseason for the Tampa Bay Lightning. They didn't make headline moves, but I think they made smart moves.
Yeah, I think sort of the joke around Tampa is this was a boring offseason, but after the past few, Tampa could use a little bit of boring, you know? Again, they didn't need to make a big swing this year. Their big swing last year was some of the moves they made, going out, freeing up space to get Jake Gensel, obviously making some tough choices and getting rid of Mikhail Sergachev. But the people that they brought in fill a very specific need. You know, you talk about Pontus Holmberg, big right wing from Toronto. That's going to be a great fit on the bottom pair. You know, you talk about somebody like, Jacob Peltier. That's somebody who I think a lot of people, especially in your neck of the woods in the Metro Division, have been talking about. That's somebody with some interesting high upside. So, no, they didn't go out and make a big swing, but the players that they brought in, I think, fit a very specific role that are going to help the Lightning this year.
And depth was an issue last year.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the biggest thing that Julien Brisebois addressed going into the offseason is some of the pieces that had sort of led the Lightning to all the success over the past couple of years. You know, you talk about, Alex Killorn, Barclay Goodrow, a lot of these big names that were around during those back-to-back Cup years. The Lightning didn't really have the liberty of those quality of players on their bottom line, on their bottom pair last year. Now it's interesting because they do have some good pieces, and it looks like as the season went on, they started investing more in some of the youth coming up. So it's going to be interesting to see, A, how well those new pieces fit, and B, is there somebody in the Lightning system right now that can jump up and maybe take on that role of a good bottom six depth player?
Is there a player or two that you have in mind who are the top candidates for that?
Yeah, I mean, everybody in Tampa talks about Mitchell Chaffee. That's a guy that I think a lot of people are still trying to figure out what exactly he's going to be. But, whether Tampa fans necessarily agreed with his level of play last year or not, I think a lot of people were like, why is this guy in the lineup? It's clear that John Cooper really trusts him. So he's somebody that I think is going to play a big role going into next year. You also look, we mentioned, Jacob Peltier. That's a guy that's been around the block a few times in the NHL. Obviously didn't quite have the success in Calgary that I think a lot of people were expecting from him. Goes to Philadelphia, impresses in some of his limited role, but not enough to kind of earn a full-time spot. I think there's a lot of people saying, look, if you can put him on the third line and maybe just let him kind of pick and choose the type of, situations in which he's used, that's somebody that can be a big boom or bust player. At least that's kind of what I'm thinking in terms of forward. On defense, the one name to watch out for to me is Max Crozier. This is a guy that's been a star in Syracuse. He's been up and down the past couple of years. He's another depth defenseman, and I think maybe he starts the year as sort of that seventh guy, but he's somebody that I think can evolve into a really interesting bottom four type defenseman for the Lightning.
So here we are, training camp rapidly approaching. What are your biggest concerns about this team at this point?
The biggest for me is health. And if you listen to Locked on Lightning, Greg Stevens says it pretty much with any player that comes up is, can they stay healthy? Look, if you put the Lightning roster up against anybody else in the NHL, you have an argument for this being one of the best rosters in the league. They're loaded. They have an absolutely dynamite first line. One of the best number one defenders in the league, elite goaltending. But beyond them, that's where the question marks start. As you mentioned, the depth that they've had the past several years wasn't necessarily there last year. They've had moves to fix it, but what happens to Kucherov if he gets injured? Is there somebody else that can put up that level of production, or multiple players that are capable of that quality of production? If Victor Hedman goes down, who's that guy that's quarterbacking the defense? That's a big question mark for the Lightning. So there's a really good roster, but there's also not a lot of room for, error if somebody gets hurt.
The Atlantic Division, a very tough division, and obviously contains your biggest rival and the two-time defending Stanley Cup champion Florida Panthers. Have the Lightning done enough this offseason to close the gap between them and the Panthers?
You know what? If you ask Armando Velez the same question, our good friend at Locked on Panthers, me and him did a crossover where he said the same thing. He's like, look, of all the teams we played last year, that Tampa Bay series was maybe the toughest we faced, and he included the Edmonton Oilers in that. The Lightning are right there, and you saw at the end of the series last year, the lack of depth is really, I think, what kind of wore the Lightning down over time, more so than maybe, no goals from Kucherov. So I think if these depth pieces pay off in some of these savvy moves that JBV made this offseason, and some of these young players step up, like we said, I think that the Tampa Bay Lightning are right there with the Florida Panthers. Obviously, Florida, for good reason, is going to be the favorite going into this year. But Tampa's got a team that I think can threaten if some of those pieces stay up. And like I said, if they can stay healthy.
Always a big if in this game, for sure. One prospect who will not be with the team is Isaac Howard. He was traded. Were you disappointed that they couldn't reach an agreement with him, and were you satisfied with the return in that trade?
I mean, yeah, anytime you have a Hobie Baker winner on your team and somebody who's got the personality of an Isaac Howard, that's a guy that you would love to have on your team, I think most hockey fans would say. But look, for whatever reason, it didn't work, whether there's, the rumors of he wanted guarantee for more ice time, whether he just didn't think he fit in the Tampa system, whatever it was, for some reason, he just wasn't that keen on being a Tampa Bay Lightning player. So, Julian Brisebois and company did the best they can do. And hey, look, Sam O'Reilly, maybe he doesn't have that name factor that Isaac Howard had. Maybe he doesn't have that explosive ceiling, but he still projects to be a really good NHL player, maybe a really solid second line, third line guy for years to come. And like I said, the Tampa Bay Lightning need players like that they can kind of build spots around moving forward. So, getting O'Reilly, I think, was a good, I think a good stopgap to losing Isaac Howard.
What do you think are the keys to the season this year, besides, obviously, as you mentioned, staying healthy?
Well, there's two that stay in mind to me. And one is, does the offense come out with that same firepower they did last year? Tampa Bay Lightning, number one offense in the league during the regular season last year. A lot of it was due to some of the depth guys like Brandon Hagel, Anthony Cirelli having career years. Can they keep that level of production up? And, guys like Oliver Bjorkstrand, can they get back to the level that they were at a few years ago and become also really big depth contributors to the team? I'm also looking at guys like Gage Gonsalves. Can he take the next step in his career? And then the other one is on defense. Who's going to be the guy behind Victor Hedman that kind of steps up and becomes a block for this defense? Ryan McDonough, love him. One of my favorite players in the entire NHL. But he's also 36 years old, or 35, something like that. But, towards the late end of his career, I look at somebody maybe like JJ Moser, who they got from the rest in peace Arizona Coyotes a few years back in that Mikhail Sergachev trade. That's a guy that I think maybe is ready to take the next step in his career and sort of be that complementary piece to Victor Hedman. And if he can project to be not even like a number one guy, but maybe just like a 1B, then I think the Tampa Bay Lightning have a pretty good building block on defense beyond Victor Hedman.
Going to be an interesting season down in Florida. Nick, why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they could find the podcast and where they could find you and your co-host on social media?
Yeah, you can check out me and my new co-host, Greg Steven, at Locked On Lightning. We're on 5 days a week. You can follow us on Twitter at LO_Lightning. Follow us on social media at Locked On Lightning. And yeah, tune in 5 days a week wherever you get your podcast or on YouTube.
Nick, thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks, Gil.
Today's episode is brought to you by your friends at FanDuel. The NFL season is back, and FanDuel is making sure you're ready for kickoff with a can't-miss offer. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your first bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. Again, bet just $5, and if your first bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. I love using FanDuel because it fits however you like to bet. Like player props? How about building a same game parlay to try to win even more money? Or you could jump in live as the action unfolds. It makes every game more exciting, whether you're watching your favorite team or just keeping an eye on your fantasy lineup. So, are you ready to play? Download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet, and if it wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. Again, visit FanDuel.com to download the app. Check it out today. It is my pleasure to welcome to the show for the first time the new co-host of Locked On Avalanche, Zach Pearson. And Zach, it's been an interesting offseason. The Avalanche seems to me trying to get some depth pieces to sort of get that lineup to go on a longer playoff run. How would you grade the offseason overall?
I'd give it a solid B. I think there's probably some more that the Avs could have done, but I really like that recent signing of Victor Olofsson to shore up that third line. And once I'm blanking on his name, Logan O'Connor comes back after his injury recovery, I really think the Avs depth is not going to be too much of an issue, barring other injuries coming in. So not the best offseason, but I think they did enough to address the needs they had.
And with training camp coming up very, very soon, what is your biggest concern about this team right now?
Ooh, that's a great question. As much as I said, I think the depth's not as big of a deal. I think the depth is easily the biggest concern. I mean, we're still a pretty top-heavy team over here in Colorado. Those top two lines, Brock Nelson, I'm hoping will be everything that we expect him to be with that contract. That's a little bit of a concern, but not as much. I really hope that it's not a same season where it's shut down the top line and you shut down the Avalanche. I really am hopeful that the bottom six will come through as much as I think they're capable of doing. But that is probably my biggest concern spot, I think, at the moment.
Are there any prospects out there who you think are ready to step in and maybe make a mark this year?
I really don't think so, unfortunately. The Avs prospect pool is not, I don't think, as NHL ready as some other prospect pools across the NHL. They've got some guys that I think will end up coming up and being able to make a little bit of an impact, specifically looking at Ilya Nabokov. But their depth, their prospect depth is just not there right now. But that's a testament, I think, to ownership and to Joe Sakic and Chris McFarland going, you know what, we're all in right now. Prospects aren't going to be the focus while you're all in to win the cup in this window that they're in.
Gabriel Landeskog came back, played a little bit in the playoffs last year, but missed a lot of time. A lot of people doubted whether he'd ever play again. Do you think he's ready for an 82-game grind plus playoffs? Or do you think that the Avalanche will try to pace him at all?
So I got the privilege of watching his first 2 games back in the AHL with the Eagles in person, and watching him hit the ice, he did everything I think properly, granted at a lower level in the AHL. Then he came back for the playoffs and had some really good games with the Avs against the Stars, even though we didn't win that series. I really think right now only time will tell. My impression is he feels ready to go, right? He is set for an 82 game season. He doesn't plan to miss a second of ice time that is available to him. That being said, it'll really be interesting to see how that plays out because 3 years is a long time to spend away from the NHL and to just jump right back into it full blown. And he plans to play in the Olympics. I I think he believes he's ready, and honestly, I really feel like when you're that level of athlete, a lot of that has to be mental, right? So his mindset, I think, is going to lend to him doing really well this year.
Talk to me about the goaltending. How confident are you that the goaltending will not be an issue this year?
I am confident. I have been a Mackenzie Blackwood fan for a while. I do a dynasty fantasy hockey league, and Blackwood has been my goaltender for as long as I can remember being a part of this league. I think he's going to do excellent. His underlying numbers are always really good. There's a reason that the NHL recently put him and Wedgwood in the top. I think they were fifth or sixth overall in tandems. I don't have that list up right now, but like I really do believe the front office did a great job of picking up a goaltending tandem that is going to backstop this Avalanche to a very solid season and to a much hotter start this year. So they don't have as much of a rough beginning to the season as they did last year, which will help them down the stretch and going into the playoffs.
A lot of questions about the long-term situation with Marty Necas, the contract. How do you see this playing out? What are the Avs looking to do here?
I've actually talked about this with Chris on the Locked On Avalanche podcast, and him and I think, are on a pretty similar page right here. I think that Marty Necas gets a contract before December. I think around Thanksgiving is about as long as this thing goes. I think the front office believes in him. I think he is a talented enough player to warrant that contract. And I think it gets done pretty quick. If anything hangs it up past that, I don't know that he stays on the team. I think if it passes December and there's no contract in place, it's going to be a Miko style situation, which honestly, I would put as a bit of a failure on the front office, and I think a lot of Avs fans would too. But I don't see it coming to that. I really do think Marty's a great player. The front office believes in him. The team believes in him. You wouldn't have gone and traded Mikko Rantanen for Necas if you didn't think he was going to do what he needs to do for the team, right? So I think that contract gets done. I think it's probably a lot of people will see as an overpay, but time will tell exactly what it is. And he's going to be here for at least a handful more years.
When you say an overpay, what number do you roughly think this is going to?
That is really tough, right? Because you also have Makar's extension coming up, and you're going to have to make sure that you stay cap compliant. Excuse me. I think he probably gets in that Nelson range, maybe even a little bit higher, maybe pushing the 8 million mark. But again, I don't know exactly what that's going to come out to be. I do know that if it hits up in that Nelson / above Nelson range, that a lot of Avs fans are going to immediately say overpay, just like they did with Nelson. But I think there's a lot of potential to Necas's game, and I think he's going to show exactly what he's capable of coming up over this next season to warrant what that payment's going to be.
The Avalanche have a potentially unusual situation on defense. They have 4 good right shot defensemen. The rest of the league is eager to find. They're hard to find right shot defensemen. How do you see this playing out? Who could play on the offside? And also, is it possible that a trade happens because of the supply and demand for right shot defensemen?
It's definitely possible a trade happens. However, honestly, on the defense, the number one guy I see being traded is one of the left shot defensemen in Sam Girard. I don't know that the Avs front office would really entertain without a really good return for anybody other than Sam Girard. I guess you could potentially look at Sam Malinsky being moved, but Burns on a 1-year deal. They just extended Manson for another 2 years after this year, so I don't see him really being moved. And obviously, unless there's some sort of complete implosion in the front office and they lose their minds, you're not moving Taze or Makar. So I really think that the only one I'd see traded is Girard. And being a left-handed defenseman, I don't know why that would be like, as you were saying, with the right-handed defenseman being ones to potentially move, I don't know who you get back or who wants to be interested in that. So I'm not sure I see a trade on defense, honestly. I think they're pretty well set where they're at. And the Avs are going to be, I think, a really good defensive team once again, as they have been for a handful of years.
What about Jack Drury? He's scheduled to be the 3C. How confident are you in his ability to fill that spot?
I'm feeling pretty good with Drury. I was pretty impressed with him last season. I think he's shown enough flashes of being a very solid centerman for those bottom six roles. And from what I've seen of training camp and everything so far this year, rather just practice skates and everything, he's shown a little bit more offensiveness. He's got a bit of a scoring touch that I think is going to translate well into this upcoming season. Obviously, live games are going to be a lot different of a situation, so we'll see what exactly that looks like after they hit the ice against actual opponents. And that's where that bottom depth for the forwards concern kind of comes into play, right? But I think Jack Drury is going to show that he's more than worth that contract that he's got for this upcoming year. I actually am very hopeful for him. I think that's going to be a solid depth player. And once Logan O'Connor comes back, I think he looks even better, just because he'll have a little bit less of that kind of responsibility to shoulder.
All right, Zach, why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they could find the podcast and where they could find you and your co-host on social media?
Well, you can check us out. The Locked On Avalanche podcast on Twitter. X is at LOPN_Avs. You can also follow us on Instagram at Locked On Avalanche. You can find me at Xavier Superfly on all of the social media platforms. And of course, always find us on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, wherever you listen to your podcast. Just search Locked On Avalanche and come give us a listen every day.
All right, Zach, thanks so much and welcome aboard.
Thank you very much, Gil.
It is great to welcome back to the show a familiar face and voice to Locked On NHL fans, Seth Tupel of Locked On Wild. And lots going on for the Wild this offseason, but the biggest story, the Kaprizov negotiations. He's coming back from Russia soon. It's supposed to pick up again. What's going on and where are we at?
Yeah, that's the big part of this, Gil. And thanks for having me, by the way. Great to talk a little hockey. We had first big weekend of NFL football, so spent most of my weekend doing that. And most of my weekends just continuing to kind of gear up for the Kirill Kaprizov signing. Now, there have been a lot of people that are concerned that this is taking as long as it is. The expectation was that, maybe this was going to get done as soon as July 1st. And we are in September now, and there still hasn't been any sort of announcement that Kirill Kaprizov is staying, which has led people to kind of go down the path of, well, if he hasn't signed by now, there's some steam. There must be some steam that he's not going to stay. And I think people need to keep in mind, he hasn't been, he just recently got into the United States. I think he's watching the U.S. Open. There have been some stories that he's shared on Instagram. So he is in the U.S. recently. But before that, he hadn't been in the States for most of the offseason. And there are a couple of things at play here. His agent, Paul Theophanos, is notoriously hard to work with. Kind of a guy that likes to kind of make you sit and think about it. Makes it a long process. Just likes the theater of the negotiation. So that has drawn this process out. It drew out the process, his previous contract, to the point that Bill Guerin went down to Florida and they hammered it out in a day. I don't know if there is the assumption that these negotiations take weeks. This is something that once the two sides get together, they're going to be able to iron this out pretty quickly. The Minnesota Wild know what's at stake with Kirill Kaprizov if he stays. And more importantly, what's at stake if he doesn't? So there's no sort of desire to let this play out any further than it needs to. And I think at this point, Kirill knows what the Wild are. And I don't think this is something that he's going to be looking to draw out any longer than necessary. Like once he gets to Minnesota, once he gets to training camp, if it draws out at that point, then yeah, maybe there is a little need to start to sound the alarms. But the Wild's offer is going to give him everything that he's asking for. Term, AAV. It just depends on kind of what he's looking for. And once they get in a room and they hammer it out, I would imagine it'll be signed pretty quickly. But the other part of this is Connor McDavid's deal has to factor in. Not necessarily because, well, how long is McDavid going to stay? How much is he going to sign for? Because if McDavid signs first, then Kaprizov can one-up that. If Kaprizov signs first, then McDavid can one-off that. So I think this is a little bit of a dance between the two to see who gets to say that they're the highest paid player in the NHL for a little bit. So all that factors in, but ultimately I think he knows what he wants to do at this point. It's just a matter of making sure that all the other things that go into a contract are taken care of, and it's just a matter of signing on the dotted line if he wants to stay.
Where do you estimate this is going to go as far as term, as far as money is concerned?
It's interesting because the Wild in Kaprizov's last deal, they wanted to go long, and Kaprizov's agent wanted to go shorter. So they settled on 5 years. I think this time, they'll settle on 6. Because the Wild can offer 2 more years than anyone else can if this gets done before July 1st of next year. They can offer 2 more years. They can offer 8. The most any other team is going to be able to offer him is 6. And as far as the AAV goes, as far as how much money he actually pulls in, I don't think there's any team that is going to be able to top what the Minnesota Wild will offer him. It will not be the money that causes him to potentially leave. It'll be the other factors, but I think ultimately it ends up being a 5 or a 6 year deal, gives him some security, and keeps him in a Minnesota Wild uniform for at least 6 more years.
Talk to me about this offseason. I mean, some interesting moves made, but how do you grade it overall?
I'm going to give it a C. It wasn't a flashy offseason by any means for the Wild, but I think it was a smart offseason. There just were so many deals that were signed by players that chose to stay with the team that they were on. And the two most notable guys that did end up going elsewhere, Mitch Marner signed an 8-year deal with Vegas. You're probably not going to offer him that. And Nikolai Ehlers was the other big one. And the Wilds, they brought in Nico Sturm, who was a need as far as bottom 6 players go, a center that can come in and can responsibly play in the 4th line, something that the Wilds, they had a lot of guys that filled that spot last year that just really weren't NHL guys. So getting Nico Sturm in to play that role is going to be big. Vladimir Tarasenko is a gamble, but it's a gamble that costs you nothing but taking on the remainder of the salary. And he is somebody that is looking to improve upon what he did last year. Kirill Kaprizov wanted this to happen. He kind of helped make it happen. So it's clear that Tarasenko has Kirill's backing as well. If he pans out and can give them a reliable scorer on that second line, that fills a pretty big need for this team. If he doesn't, then I think that's what we're going to see. That's where we're going to see Bill Guerin be the most aggressive, because the Wild do have cap space. They have assets. They have picks. They have whatever you need to go out and get somebody during the season. So if this team gets off to a good start like they did last year, I think Guerin will look to do something to kind of strengthen that at the deadline now that they actually have the space to do it. If not, then he's going to look to make a move to try to spark something. But I think the biggest move that this team makes will be during the season or at the trade deadline too.
What are the biggest questions facing this team? And I would have to include how big a role a certain rookie defenseman is going to have this year.
Yeah, that is one of the biggest questions for the team this year, Gil, is what do the young players contribute? How much are they asked to contribute this year? That includes Zeev Boyum. That includes highly touted prospect Danila Yurov, who is going to be getting an NHL taste this year. But other prospects like Liam Ogren, like David Juracek, other guys who are highly touted in the prospect system as well. Jesper Wallstedt, who has an opportunity to be the backup goalie this year. How much are the Wild going to rely on those players? How much are they going to trust them to grow into the roles that they could fill? We all know, and I stress this is not just a Minnesota Wild problem. It happens throughout the league. Coaches tend to have trust in veterans more than they do in young players. It's just something that happens throughout the league. So do we see the Wild give players an opportunity to kind of learn on the fly and maybe have a little bigger ceiling? Or do we see the Wild rely more on some of the veteran guys that they brought in for tryouts and just for minor league signings too? That'll be an interesting one. Can Vladimir Tarasenko bounce back? That's a big question mark for me as well. And can this team avoid the infirmary this year? Can we avoid having 92 players injured over the course of a season? If the Wild can cut the injuries down even a little bit, it doesn't have to be like we didn't get hurt at all like the Winnipeg Jets until the end of the season. If they can just avoid major catastrophic injuries, I think that will give them an opportunity to be pretty good this year.
Well, I know you'll have it every step of the way covered. Seth, why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they could find the podcast and where they could find you on social media?
3 words on Google are your friend. Locked on Wild. You can find all of our social media channels there, as well as all the links for the podcast on Apple, Spotify, your favorite platforms, and on YouTube as well. So just search Locked on Wild, and we will have you covered every step of the way.
All right, Seth, thanks so much.
Thank you, Gil.
I want to thank my guests. I want to thank Nick Morgan of Locked On Lightning and Zach Pearson of Locked On Avalanche, and of course, Seth Tupel of Locked On Wild for joining me today. I'm Gil Martin. I host the Monday edition of Locked On NHL, and I co-host the Friday edition along with Rachel Donner. Don't forget, we're here every day, Monday through Saturday, bringing you the biggest stories from around the hockey world. So hit the like button and subscribe so you never miss an episode of Locked On NHL. Have a great day, everyone. Season's just around the corner. Stay safe, and thanks for watching and listening to the Locked On NHL podcast.